For our first speaker, please welcome Beth Emet to marry Rabbi Andrew London.
Thank you all for coming and supporting our students and supporting the amazing work that they are doing. We had an incredible trip down to El Paso and to Juarez and to Las Cruces, New Mexico, and we stayed at the Cristo Rey Lutheran Church there. And the pastor of the church, Rosemary Sanchez Guzman, who we just called Pastora, which is pastor in Spanish, we called her that as we lived in that church and greeted refugees, and we ate meals with them, and we shared bathroom facilities with them, and most importantly, though, we learned their stories. And every time we would learn a story, Pastora would say to us, remember when you hear people's stories about their trip to the United States, remember when you listen to their stories about what they suffered in their home countries, that you need to listen respectfully, because when we hear people's stories, we are walking on holy ground. What a powerful image. And every time we listened to those stories, our students listened with that kind of respect and love, that we are walking on the holy ground of people's experiences. And in this action today, we're going to hear some of those holy stories. And we're going to respond in the way that our tradition teaches us to respond when we hear about stories of suffering and of difficulty, that we respond with love and with compassion. We know all too well in our Jewish tradition about our own history of not always being received in our home countries or countries that we thought were our home countries with dignity and respect. And we have wandered from country to country because we have suffered at the hands of people, because we have been persecuted, because we have been killed. We know what it is like to be the stranger, because that's where we started, actually. We started in the land of Egypt, and there we were strangers. And the book of Leviticus says to us, because you know the heart of the stranger, you shall love the stranger as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt, and you know what it is like to be taken advantage of, to be abused, to be killed, to be enslaved. Over 36 times it says this in our Torah, the most oft-repeated verse. How can we not take that seriously? And yet we often go on with our daily lives and we don't pay attention to those who are living in the shadows, to those who are afraid of deportation, to those who are scared for their lives. But when we went down to El Paso and we walked on holy ground with the refugees and the asylum seekers that we met, we could no longer close our eyes. We could no longer close our hearts, but we had to open them to the stranger, to love them as ourselves, and to protect them. And that's what our students learned, and that's what we're going to hear about today. Thank you for coming and hearing those stories with us and walking on the holy ground that we walked on in El Paso.
Thank you, Rabbi London, for setting the tone so beautifully, grounding this work in our Jewish tradition. Next, we will hear from Beth Emet Youth. Beth Emet, an ETHS student, Jonah Friedman, Elam, will speak about her participation in the Dreamers Club at the high school. Then we will hear from Beth Emet high school students Hannah, Alyssa, and Claudia, who recently traveled to the U.S.-Mexico border.
So, unfortunately, like some of my peers, I wasn't able to take the trip to the U.S.-Mexico border. Is that I'm a member of the Dreamers Club at my school, ETHS. And what the Dreamers Club does is we advocate for undocumented students and their families, as well as raise scholarships for undocumented students. Because when you're undocumented, it's really hard to fill out FAFSA and get a lot of forms of financial aid. Because you often don't have a social security number or a lot of other things that we require in this country to get forms of financial aid, which really sucks. So some of you are probably wondering what DREAMers stands for and why we're even called DREAMers. The name DREAMers comes from the DREAM Act, and DREAM stands for Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors. And the act, as well as the name, are both good and bad. So the thing about the name and the term DREAMers is that having the term alien in the act is really derogatory and not at all sensitive to individuals who are undocumented. But furthermore, the act itself is very flawed. The thing about the DREAM Act is that it only covers very specific people. In order to be covered by the DREAM Act, you have to have come to the US at a pretty young age so that it can be considered not of your own free will. And that criminalizes the families of undocumented youth, which is obviously not okay. Also, you have to graduate from high school with a college-ready GPA, and that really doesn't allow a lot of people to be covered by the act. But as I said before, it's good too, because the term DREAMers is an umbrella term, and I know that umbrella terms are bad. We've all heard that they're bad, but they're good too, because they raise awareness to an entire group of people, and they cover a lot of people, and they say, hey, these people exist, and they're here. And that's really important for undocumented people, because awareness is super important. And awareness is a big part of what the Dreamers Club works to raise. And in fact, the Dreamers Club doesn't help undocumented people because we force them to become part of the club and engage in our activities. We help them because we raise awareness. In fact, before the Dreamers Club existed, most of the people at ETHS were not only using language that wasn't sensitive to undocumented students, they were calling them illegals and aliens and a lot of other really not so nice words, but they also weren't protecting them or caring for them. So what the Dreamers Club has done in its existence is actually make ETHS into a sanctuary school, which is really awesome. Basically, what that means is that if ICE officials come to ETHS, we're not going to let them search the school without a warrant, and we're going to work to protect our students. And another great thing about the Dreamers Club is that we don't ask if you're undocumented, and it doesn't matter if you're undocumented to join the club. In fact, if you're undocumented, you don't even have to join the club, because it's really important to protect undocumented people by not asking if they're undocumented. And it's important to make sure that they feel comfortable. And in our current political climate, not asking them if they're undocumented is a really important way to make them feel comfortable. So remember how I said that we raise money for scholarships? If you'd like to help us do that, please see me afterwards and give me money, or I have magnets too that you can buy, and that would look wonderful on all of your fridges. But one last thing. In the course of being in the club, I actually learned that 2 of my friends were undocumented. And because I had met them as people who I didn't think had a different immigration status than me, it didn't make me see them differently. And I think that's a really important thing to understand, that an immigration status doesn't say anything about you as a person, and it doesn't change who you are. And labels themselves don't say anything about you as a person. And it's important not to reduce a human being to a label. So with that, I want to say good afternoon and have a nice day.
Hi, I'm Claudia.
And I'm Hannah.
I'm Alyssa.
This spring, 15 of us traveled to El Paso, Texas, a border town, for a week-long border immersion program called Cristo Rey, where we learned about the realities of what actually happens at the border between the U.S. and Mexico. While we were there, we attended court hearings, visited Juarez, El Paso's sister city in Mexico, listened to multiple stories, and kept journals recording our thoughts. Here are a few excerpts that encapsulate what we learned. Every time Hannah speaks, it is an excerpt from the Fronteras blog.
It occurred to me today one reason why this program with Cristo Rey is called Border Immersion. While we're only here for a week, the community of this church and everyone who assists at the programs and agencies we visited are living in this reality every single day of their lives. The first major immersive experience we had was attending sentencing hearings at the U.S. District Court in Las Cruces, New Mexico. We saw people standing in chains, unable to answer questions as their attorneys spoke for them. Their lives were flashing before their eyes as they learned the consequences of what they were charged for. Allotted only a few minutes each, they tried as hard as possible to change the outcomes. Each case was one of many that the judge would see that day.
At other instances throughout the trip, we had the opportunity to hear accounts of how many immigrants crossed the border and their lives before they left on this journey. One night, we participated in a Lenten service at Cristo Rey, where the following story was shared with us.
The pastor from El Salvador told us his story, how the gangs had threatened to rape his 15-year-old daughter, how they had tried to recruit his son, how the smugglers tried to make him have sex with a prostitute as punishment for stopping them from raping the other woman they were smuggling, and how Border Patrol kept him and his son in a room they called the freezer. The freezer was a room with ice-cold temperatures where people were kept for days on end with minimal food, water, and access to bathrooms. This was juxtaposed by words from the Border Patrol officers we met earlier that day. They were friendly when they spoke to us, and they told us that they were open to all questions, that their goals were of transparency and education, and to dispel any myths that may have transpired across the country. This is what they said. We try to do our job with compassion. We aren't robots. The contrast to the pastor's testimony was striking. But of course, the Border Patrol's job is to lock up bad guys, which is what the officers said when they asked how to explain their job to their children.
The night of the Lenten service, Pastora Rosemary from Cristo Rey received a call. A father and son who were staying at the church as refugees had accidentally signed their own deportation orders that morning in the detainment center. Officers had told them that they wouldn't be prosecuted for illegal entry, so they complied by signing the papers put before them because they couldn't speak English. On Friday night, we reached the end of our week along the border. We had seen the border fence from both sides and heard the stories of many immigrants and refugees. We had met doctors, legal assistants, church members, and children in the area. At Shabbat services, we noticed an alternative reading in the prayer book, which encompassed the stories we had heard and the places we had seen.
This is an hour of change. Within it, we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? This is an hour of change in our country. We should be fighting for the rights of all people to live freely within our borders.
Thank you to our Beth Emet youth speakers for sharing your powerful experiences. We will now hear from our state and federal legislators about how we can get involved with immigration advocacy. First, Ruthie Carroll will read a letter from Beth Emet congregant Representative Jen Sukowski, who could not be with us today. Then we will hear from 18th District State Representative Robin Gable about the Trust Act.
Dear friends, I'm sorry that I cannot be with you today, but I want to thank you for putting together today's Immigration Community Action event. I also want to thank Abigail Backer, the Director of Youth Programs at Beth Emet, for her vision and leadership. As always, I am so proud that Beth Emet, my synagogue, is playing such an important role in promoting social justice. Jewish teachings have always taught us to welcome immigrants into our midst. I often turn to Leviticus 19 during immigration debates on the House floor, reminding my colleagues of its message. And if a stranger sojourn with thee in your land, ye shall not vex him. But the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. As Jews, our history has shown us the damage that can occur when those seeking refuge, a place in which to build a better life, are turned away. Based on Jewish religious world and Jewish history, the fight for just immigration policies is a fight we must undertake, that we must win. That is why I'm so grateful for those who are participating today and to those who went to the border to bear witness. Cruel detention and deportation policies are literally tearing families apart and destroying lives. Reading your blogs shows me how much you have absorbed their pain, fear, and desperation. I know that you will turn that experience into the advocacy we need to make changes. My parents were immigrants. They were welcomed and built a good life, contributing to our community. This is the model that we need to promote, but it is not the reality today. Even in our community, children and parents are living in fear. You can make a difference. I know that through your efforts in the advocacy of the broad immigrant rights community, we will succeed in passing comprehensive immigration reform that improves people's lives and strengthens our nation. Sincerely, Jan Schakowsky, Member of Congress.
Good afternoon. So thank you for inviting me here today. I am very proud of your efforts for really going out of your way to really learn about this issue. I think that's great. It's fantastic. So I was asked to talk a little bit about the Illinois Trust Act. So this is legislation that was put in the Illinois legislature for two reasons. One is to set reasonable constitutional limits on local police interaction with ICE enforcement. And the second goal is to foster trust between local police and immigrant communities. Whoa! And so I want to describe just a little bit about the bill and then talk to you about where it's at right now and then what you can do to help. So the bill has four components to it. One is restricting cooperation and communication between local police and immigrant enforcement. So this means that the local police do not have to, like if they stop somebody, they don't have to ask, are you an immigrant or not? And other things like that. The second thing that this legislation does is that it protects schools, medical facilities, and courthouses from immigration arrests. So ICE sometimes would just hang out at these facilities and then ask people, are you documented or undocumented? And that will not be allowed. Actually, our librarian, one of the board members of our library board here in Evanston, asked me if I would look into also having libraries being safe havens. So I did write the sponsor of the bill, and he said, yep, we're looking into it. So I'm hoping that can be another protected area. Third, it ensuring that victims of certain crimes who work with law enforcement can get the documentation they need to apply for federal U and 2 visas. So what this means is that if somebody's a victim of crime, they are afraid to come forward. They are afraid that if they come forward, they will ask if they're immigrants, they will find out they're undocumented, they will end up being deported or put in prison. So there's measures in this bill that will set up rules about how local police are supposed to deal with those issues. Right now, they did a survey, and hardly any police departments around the state know what to do in those cases. And since Trump has been in office, there are more and more people. There have been an extreme reduction in the number of people reporting domestic violence and other crimes with victims. And then the fourth piece of this legislation is barring state and local participation in any potential registry for Muslims or other nationality. So I think that's really important to include in here. So let's see where the bill is right now. So right now, this bill's passed the Senate. It got 31 votes in the Senate and 21 noes. So that's a lot of noes for the Senate. It was pretty much on partisan lines, and there were a number of Democrats who didn't vote. So now the bill has come over to the House. It's been in the Executive Committee, and we expect it to get out of the Executive Committee this week, and then it could be voted on the floor. In the House, we need 60 votes. We have 67 Democrats. So we need at least 60 of those Democrats to vote for this bill. So what can you do? Well, I'm voting for it. And if you live in this district, you've got one vote. Laura Fine is voting for it. She represents another part of Evanston. What I would encourage you to do is to talk to any friends that you have that live in other parts of the state, even around the suburbs here, and encourage them to call their legislators and let them know. Secondly, and you can do that, either call them and let them know, you can put it out in social media, do it that way. Sometimes you can reach more people that way, and just let everyone know that you support it and you want them to support it and you want them to contact their legislators. I would also encourage you, if you want, you can send me an email too and just let me know that you support. So, because we do count. We're like, okay, we got this many in favor, this many opposed. So when I go to the floor and I say, listen, you know, I've gotten hundreds of emails from my constituents wanting me to support this bill. If you have stories you want to share with me, I can read those on the House floor when we have the debate. So if there's anything that you want to say for me to share with the public, I'm happy to do that. I think you also can help join in some rallies in Springfield. They're probably going to work with groups, work with ICER and other groups that are working on this issue. I know it's called the Campaign for a Welcoming Illinois. Get involved. There's more power when there's in collaboration. So the more groups you have, the more influence you'll have. So work with the groups that are coordinating efforts. I'm sure there will be some folks coming down to Springfield in the next 2 weeks. We are out of session. We have until May 31st to pass this. If we don't pass it now, then we'll have to wait until veto session, and in veto session you need 71 votes for it to be immediately passed, or you can get 60 votes and it won't pass until the next year. So either way, but it would be great if we could pass this bill now. And there may be some local rallies as well. So you may not have to go as far as Springfield. There may be people who are reticent to vote for this just along the border with Wisconsin or places close to you. So pay attention, work with the Campaign for a Welcoming Illinois, make your voices heard, send me information, and with all of our efforts, I'm confident that we will pass this bill. Thank you.
I would now like to introduce Antonio Gutierrez, our next speaker. Antonio is a queer Latinx immigrant from Guadalajara, Mexico. Antonio has lived in Chicago for 16 years after immigrating to the United States to reunite with family members. Antonio is a graduate from Illinois Institute of Technology with a Bachelor's of Architecture. After graduation in 2012, Antonio joined the immigrant rights movement as an organizer with the Immigrant Youth Justice League, an undocumented-led organization formed in 2009. Since 2012, Antonio has collectively organized rallies such as the National Coming Out of the Shadows rally, fundraising events, mass marches, national retreats, and civil disobedience. Antonio currently volunteers as a tenant organizer with the Autonomous Tenants Union, as a family liaison with organized communities against deportation, and is a board member of the National Committee of the Right to the City Alliance. We first met Antonio during his work at Centro Autonomo in Albany Park, which we visited in our 8th grade social justice class to learn about gentrification and tenant organizing. We are so honored to have him here to speak with us. Please welcome Antonio Gutierrez.
How's everybody doing today? All right, yeah. Thank you everyone for being here and the students that put this together. I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my story. I'm undocumented, unafraid, and apologetic. I came to Chicago when I was only 11 years old, and I remember the first day that we came here. My dad sit my sister, my mom, and I down in our living room, And we talked about our status and what it meant to be undocumented and how we didn't want nobody to find out because that could mean the separation of our family again. And during that time, that was probably one of the only times that as a family we discussed what it meant to be undocumented and the risk of deportation for our whole family if somebody was to find out and refer us to ICE. Throughout my life, I went to school, I did well in education, I got to college, and when I graduated in 2012, I found out that now that I had a college diploma, it meant nothing because without a social security number, I couldn't get a job as an architect as I always dreamed. And so that's when I decided that I was no longer gonna hide in the shadows and that it was time for me to speak up and to join others that were building a movement across the nation that was saying, I'm undocumented, I am here, I exist, and I have a voice. And that's when I joined the Undocumented Immigrant Youth Justice League. My story and the risk of deportation is not something that is just alienated to me or to my family members. It is the reality of more than 12 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States. The ability of having access to quality work and having the ability of having resources being given to you are a lack of rights that undocumented immigrants deal all the time. And it puts us in situations where we're exploited for our labor without proper wage and rights given to us as workers. Being undocumented during our current administration means many different things. And that's why I'm a member of OCAD, Organized Communities Against Deportation, a group, a grassroots organization that is undocumented led that fights case by case the criminalization and deportation of Black and brown immigrant communities. Case by case highlighting the immigration's violations of civil rights and human rights, just as like the Wilmer Catalan case that we currently have at OCAD. On March 27, ICE or immigration came to do a home raid at Back of the Yards neighborhood in Chicago. They came and arrested and detained Wilmer Catalan, a man, an undocumented father of 3 US citizens that was recovering from multiple shotguns after an encounter on January 15 of this year, where after getting out of a restaurant in Back of the Yards, he was shot multiple times, not knowing why. And he was recovering from those multiple shotguns after he was released from the hospital a month later and was recovering from those when ICE agents came to his house, came in self-identifying as the police, and got inside his house without a warrant and detained him in front of his wife and 3-year-old son. Right now, OCAD is currently fighting his deportation and asking for the release of Wilmer Catalan, who is still not receiving proper medical care in McHenry Detention Center. We have filed a civil rights lawsuit against the Chicago Police Department for putting him in the gang database of the city of Chicago, and reason why ICE agents were able to get his home address and do the home raid that detained him. We're also filing this lawsuit against ICE agents who came into his house without a proper warrant. And we're also putting this civil rights lawsuit against McHenry Detention Center, who has a history of not giving proper care, medical care, to other individuals that have been detained and that are currently in detention in McHenry waiting to hear about their immigration cases. Clearly, the Chicago Police Department and ICE are collaborating together. And we know this regardless of Chicago being self-declared a sanctuary city. Just like Evanston, we also have these 4 exceptions that are within the welcoming ordinance of both cities. These exceptions criminalize and put at risk our undocumented immigrant communities that have been criminalized by our current system. Exceptions such as if you've been convicted of a felony, if you have an upcoming court day, not even have been convicted before, or if you have all of you been put on the gang database. It is my understanding that both the city of Chicago and Evanston have a gang database, and there's uncertainty about how individuals are put into this gang database to begin with, and how reliable that information is. But what it is reliable, and what we do know and understand, is that that information is being passed and referred to immigration and putting individuals at risk of deportation and separation of our communities. We are here not to say that we need to do something about this. These exceptions are criminalizing and creating a rhetoric around who is good and a bad immigrant, and who deserves to be supported and not supported. We as OCAD support all of undocumented immigrants that come and want to organize with us. And that should be the same for those that are wanting to support other undocumented immigrants. That if we want to do it, we should not follow these separations about who deserves to be supported and who doesn't. Because having a criminal record should not make anybody less of a human. I think today we heard about different legislations that we're trying to pass. In Chicago, we're working with Black Youth Project 100, Mi Gente, and other organizations to get rid of these exceptions within the welcoming ordinance. Here in Evanston, you can do the same, but within a community organizing perspective, what we're really wanting to do and call to action to do is to create neighborhood defense networks. In Albany Park, in Little Village, at Back of the Yards, at Rogers Park, in the city of Chicago, all have completed and constructed a sense of immediate response in case of ICE raids happening in their neighborhoods, a way of responding when an undocumented immigrant is under attack. You all can also create a defense network like that one in Evanston to make sure that ICE knows that if they come to your streets, that if they come to your homes, that there's a community defense network that will support their undocumented immigrant community members. Let's make sure that there is no police collaboration between ICE agents and the police department here in Evanston. And you can make that happen by supporting and calling those representatives to make sure that legislation like the Trust Act passes. And at the end of the day, if you can support Wilmer Cantalan's petition and release, which we are currently under these multiple civil rights hearings, it will be great if you can support us by going to our page, signing the petition on organizedcommunities.org or on our Facebook event. Because what do we do when our community are under attack? We stand up, fight back. What do we do when our communities are under attack?
Stand up, fight back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio, for sharing your story with us and representing OCAD today. We look forward to continued partnership with you and your organization. For the closing prayer, we would like to invite Evanston clergy to the stage.
Very pleased today to welcome my friend and colleague, Pastor Charlotte Lehman, who is the pastor of the Reva Place Church here in Evanston. And also, Antonio, I just want to let you know that the Evanston Interfaith and Clergy and Leaders have been very active around this issue, and we've created here what we call our Solidarity Response Team. They're doing all the things that you're talking about is happening in Albany Park and other places, so it's really my great pleasure and honor to be able to invite one of the leaders of our Solidarity Response Team, Pastor Lehman, to offer for us a closing prayer. And just to let everybody know also that we are working through the Clergy Association also to create a network of sanctuary congregations in Evanston. It's going to take us probably a few months over the summer to do this, but it is well in process now. And we're hoping to be able to gather back again in the fall, in which congregations throughout the city of Evanston can declare their sanctuary status and what that means for their communities. So stay tuned for that action too. But Pastor Lehman is here with us now. Please rise so that we can conclude with a prayer together.
Thanks. I just want to say it's been an honor to learn from the leadership of Rabbi Andrea, and I can see from the heritage of this kind of training why there's such great leadership here, and so that's a wonderful thing, and it's an honor to be here. Let's pray. Oh God, what do you require of us but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with you? So would you give us hearts that break for the heartbreak of our neighbor? And would you give us courage to stand up? And would you give us strength and wisdom to speak up, to stand together, to take joy in knowing that we can make a difference? Pour out your Spirit upon us, God, that together we might make Evanston a city where your light shines for all. Thank you, God. We bless you in this day. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. To our students. One more.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and a special thanks to all of our speakers who made this event possible. Our community can accomplish so much by lifting up the stories of immigrants in our midst and working together to accomplish a collective goal. In the spirit of community, organizing, and change, we would like to ask everyone here to call their alderperson to help reform the welcoming ordinance that was recently passed in Evanston. This ordinance, while well-intentioned, included language that would not fully address the oftentimes problematic relationship between federal and local law enforcement. On the resource table below, you can find a detailed script for calling your alderperson and urging them to fix the ordinance. We ask that you join us in this effort as we work together to maintain the integrity of Evanston's sanctuary city status. Below, you can also find information about the Trust Act. We ask that you call your Illinois state representatives to urge them to vote in favor of SB 31 that Representative Gable spoke about. It is a vital piece of legislation that will make Illinois a sanctuary state. On the tables, you will also find a wide array of resources about local organizations, campaigns, and ways to get involved. Thank you again for coming out today to support our work.